You've tried to quit. The habit breaks you every time. But what if addiction isn't just a problem with willpower or pleasure? What if it's your soul crying out to be made whole? Today, we'll explore how to truly overcome addiction, not by fighting it, but by understanding what it secretly reveals about you. When we speak of addiction, we often reduce it to a matter of dependency, chemical, psychological, or behavioral. It is diagnosed, charted, and categorized with clinical precision. Substances are measured, symptoms are noted, therapies are prescribed. Yet, for all our science, many who suffer from addiction find that the root of their pain eludes them. They quit, relapse, recover, and collapse again. The cycle continues. Why? Because at its core, addiction is not merely a physiological event. It is a profound spiritual crisis. The addict is not just seeking pleasure or escape. The addict is seeking meaning, a sense of aliveness, something to fill the void that ordinary life no longer touches. Beneath the pattern of consumption lies a metaphysical hunger, a longing for connection to something greater than the ego, something eternal and unshakable. The bottle, the needle, the screen, these are not the real object of desire. They are imitations. They mimic transcendence but never truly deliver it. They promise elevation and numbness in equal measure, and while they quiet the ache for a moment, they deepen the chasm over time. Modern culture, with all its advancements, has largely exiled the sacred. We have systems for knowledge, for productivity, for pleasure, but we have little space for mystery. The soul, the ancient, intuitive dimension of the human being, has been pushed into the shadows. And so, the addict, sensing this absence at the core of life, tries to recreate the feeling of sacred intensity through artificial means. They are not merely indulging in excess. They are reaching toward the divine with broken tools. This is why traditional treatments that ignore the spiritual dimension often fail to produce lasting change. You cannot cure a spiritual ailment with only behavioral control. You cannot silence a soul's cry with rational technique alone. True healing requires a confrontation with the deepest parts of the self. It demands that we ask not only what the addict is running from, but what they are unknowingly running toward. In the chaotic, repetitive act of addiction, there is a pattern, a ritual. The ritual seeks transcendence. It mimics prayer, but without the sacred center. There is something archetypal about addiction. It mirrors the ancient myths of the hero's fall and return, the descent into the underworld, the encounter with darkness. But unlike the mythic hero who returns transformed, the addict becomes trapped in the descent. The crisis becomes the permanent state. The initiation never completes. Addiction, then, is an initiation gone wrong, a spiritual rite that never reaches the other side. In a society that offers distraction but not depth, stimulation but not transformation, it is no wonder that addiction thrives. The addict lives in a world of surfaces, yearning for depth. Their soul seeks integration, yet is handed fragmentation. What is required is not only abstinence but awakening, a restoration of inner sacredness, a reconnection with the eternal self, the inner core that gives life its symbolic and spiritual coherence. When this dimension is ignored, the addict is treated as a broken machine. Their behavior is analyzed, their brain chemistry examined. But when the spiritual nature of addiction is acknowledged, the addict is recognized not as a malfunctioning system, but as a soul in exile. They are someone who, perhaps unknowingly, is undergoing a sacred ordeal. Their suffering is not meaningless. It is mythic, and it points toward the possibility of redemption not through force, but through inner revelation. The spiritual crisis at the heart of addiction reveals a fundamental truth. The human being is not complete without meaning. We are not merely biological, we are mythological. We are creatures of symbol, ritual, and transcendence. And when that part of us is denied, it does not vanish. It returns through the back door, often in distorted and self-destructive forms. Addiction, in this light, is a cry from the unconscious to restore the sacred to its rightful place within the soul. To understand addiction, one must come face to face with the psychological concept of the shadow. The shadow is everything within us that we have rejected, denied, or failed to integrate. It contains impulses we are ashamed of, traits we have disowned, and fears we have suppressed. It is not evil in itself. It is simply unconscious. It is the part of ourselves we do not wish to be, and yet it influences us constantly, shaping our thoughts, choices, and behaviors in ways we often fail to recognize. In the case of addiction, the shadow plays a central, often hidden role. The addict is not simply someone who uses a substance or behavior to excess. The addict is often someone haunted by the parts of themselves they cannot face. These parts might include unresolved grief, buried rage, forbidden desires, unexpressed needs, or traumatic memories. Because these aspects of the psyche are too overwhelming or threatening to integrate into the conscious personality, they are cast into the unconscious, into the realm of the shadow. But repression does not erase energy, it merely displaces it. What is denied within returns, often with greater intensity, and it seeks expression through indirect means. Addiction becomes one of those expressions. It is a way for the unconscious to speak, to demand attention. The act of using, whether it is a drink, a hit, a binge, or a compulsive act, is not merely a coping mechanism. It is a ritual of avoidance. Through addiction, the addict avoids confronting the dark truths within. But paradoxically, the more they try to avoid the shadow, the more they become possessed by it. The addiction begins to control their life, to shape their identity, to become inseparable from their self-image. The very thing they run from becomes the thing that defines them. To heal, the addict must enter into a confrontation with the shadow. This is not a moral process. It is a psychological one. It requires the courage to see oneself without illusion, without justification, without the protective masks we wear in daily life. It means recognizing the pain beneath the pleasure, the desperation behind the craving. It means admitting that the addiction is not a foreign invader. It is a reflection of one's own disowned self. The addict must understand that what they hate in themselves is not foreign, but familiar. It is a part of their own nature asking to be seen. This confrontation is not easy. The shadow resists exposure. It speaks in dreams, in projections, in self-sabotage. Often we see our shadow not in ourselves, but in others, those we judge, criticize, or condemn. The addict may project their shame onto society, or their rage onto relationships. But every projection is a clue, a mirror. When those projections are withdrawn and brought back into the psyche, the individual begins to reclaim their wholeness. They start to realize that the parts they feared are not enemies, they are unintegrated aspects of the self. The reason addiction is so powerful is because it holds symbolic energy. The substance or behavior takes on the role of a false self, one that promises control, escape, even love. But behind this mask is the shadow. The addict is not addicted to the substance alone. They are entangled with a part of themselves they cannot reconcile. This entanglement must be unraveled not through suppression, but through awareness. Awareness brings the unconscious into consciousness, allowing the individual to name what was once nameless and to see what was once hidden. When the shadow is faced, truly faced, it begins to transform. It no longer has to dominate behavior from behind the scenes. It becomes part of the conscious personality, integrated and acknowledged. The individual begins to act from a place of inner alignment rather than fragmentation. They no longer need the addictive behavior to numb the pain or silence the inner conflict, because they have begun to listen to what the pain is saying. The suffering becomes a teacher, and the addiction reveals itself not as a curse, but as a message from the soul's depths, demanding recognition and reintegration of what was lost within addiction. At its most visible level, appears as a pattern of compulsive behavior, predictable, repetitive, and seemingly senseless. But when viewed through the lens of depth psychology, it reveals a deeper layer of meaning that cannot be ignored, the realm of archetypes and symbols. The human psyche is not merely a container for thoughts and memories. It is a living, symbolic system structured by archetypal patterns, universal forms or motifs that express themselves through dreams, myths, fantasies, and emotional experiences. Addiction is not separate from these symbolic forces. Rather, it is often a distorted expression of them. Within every person lies a collection of archetypes, primordial images that represent fundamental aspects of the human experience. These are not conscious constructs. They arise from the collective unconscious, and they influence our perceptions, motivations, and behavior, whether we are aware of them or not. The addict, the orphan, the seeker, the destroyer. These are not just metaphors. They are inner figures, ancient voices that inhabit the psychic landscape. When one is caught in addiction, these archetypes are often in conflict, acting out their roles without the guidance of conscious awareness. The addict archetype, for example, seeks ecstasy, relief, or oblivion, an escape from the burdens of ordinary life. But underneath this pursuit lies the deeper archetype of the seeker, one who longs for divine connection, for the sacred, for unity with something larger than the ego. Symbols play a crucial role in this process. A symbol is not merely a sign. It is an image charged with psychic energy. The bottle, the pill, the needle, the glow of a screen, these are not just tools of addiction. They become symbols of transformation, initiation, transcendence. They hold a mysterious power because they unconsciously represent something more profound. The substance becomes a ritual object, something the individual returns to over and over, not just for its physical effect, but for its symbolic promise. It becomes a substitute for sacred ritual, a false sacrament that mimics the structure of spiritual practice without leading to true awakening. This symbolic relationship is often invisible to the conscious mind. The addict does not usually understand why they are drawn so deeply to the substance or behavior. But on an unconscious level, the addiction serves as an attempt to resolve inner archetypal tension. The individual may be trying to awaken the hero, who must undergo suffering to emerge transformed. Or they may be caught in the grip of the wounded child, seeking soothing in the absence of nurturing. These archetypes are not inherently destructive. They become destructive when they operate unconsciously, without integration into the whole psyche. Dreams often reveal the presence of these archetypes. In the dream world, the language of the unconscious becomes visible. The addict may dream of journeys, of falling, of shadowy figures, of impossible tasks. These are not random. They are symbolic enactments of the inner struggle. They reveal the mythic structure underlying the addiction, the personal story nested within universal patterns. If these symbols are ignored, the unconscious must find other ways to speak through anxiety, compulsion, depression, or relapse. But when the symbols are honored, when they are explored and interpreted, they become allies in the healing process. The work of healing addiction, then, is not merely to suppress the behavior, but to decode its symbolic meaning. What is the archetypal story being lived? What symbols have taken on sacred power in the addict's psyche? What deeper yearning is hidden beneath the surface act? These questions open the door to a kind of psychological alchemy, in which the raw material of suffering is transformed into insight, and the addictive behavior becomes the starting point of a journey toward wholeness. Symbols act as guides in this process, leading the individual inward, toward the source of their longing, and toward the self, the central archetype of unity, integration, and inner completion. Addiction is often seen as a pattern that must be broken, a behavior that must be stopped. Yet beneath the surface of this struggle lies a deeper psychological truth. Addiction arises when the natural process of psychological development is interrupted or distorted. That process is known as individuation, the unfolding journey of becoming whole, of uniting the conscious personality with the unconscious elements of the psyche. It is not merely self-improvement or behavioral change, but the central task of human life. It is the path by which one becomes truly oneself, not as the ego wishes to be, but as the self already is in potential. The self in depth psychology is not the same as the ego. The ego is the center of consciousness, the I. That navigates daily life, but the self is the totality of the psyche, encompassing both conscious and unconscious dimensions. Individuation is the movement toward the self, the journey of integrating the various parts of one's being, including those that have been hidden, repressed, or feared. Addiction in this light can be understood as a consequence of failing to embark on this inner journey. It emerges when the individual is cut off from the deeper layers of their psyche, when the ego becomes inflated, isolated, or overwhelmed, and seeks relief in external forms rather than internal. Integration. For the addict, the substance or behavior often provides a temporary sense of identity. It offers structure, purpose, ritual, and escape from inner chaos. But it also fragments the psyche further, reinforcing the split between who one is and who one is meant to become. The addict becomes stuck in a loop, reliving the same emotional states, compulsions, and consequences, unable to break free because the deeper psychological needs remain unaddressed. Recovery cannot occur through willpower alone because addiction is not simply a matter of control. It is a matter of disconnection from the self. Individuation begins when one turns inward. It requires the courage to face what lies beneath the addiction, not just the pain, but the purpose. Every symptom has a meaning, and every compulsion carries a message. The psyche does not act without reason. It seeks wholeness, even through suffering. The addictive pattern, then, can be seen as a misguided attempt at integration. It tries to fill a void that can only be addressed through conscious engagement with the unconscious. This engagement often begins with dreams, emotions, synchronicities, and inner conflicts. These are signs from the unconscious, inviting the ego to enter dialogue. The process is not linear. It is circular, spiraling deeper into the psyche as new layers of the self are revealed. It involves confronting the shadow, embracing the anima or animus, and recognizing the symbolic language of the unconscious. The addict must come to see their inner life not as something to escape, but as something to explore. Therapeutic work in the context of individuation is less about fixing and more about listening. It invites the addict to ask, what is this addiction trying to express? What am I avoiding? What part of myself have I denied or neglected? These questions open the door to self-revelation. Through journaling, dream analysis, symbolic exploration, and creative expression, the individual begins to retrieve the lost pieces of the psyche. Each integration brings a new sense of inner coherence. The split between who one is and who one pretends to be begins to dissolve. At the heart of individuation is the discovery of meaning. Addiction often thrives in the absence of meaning, when life feels shallow, mechanical, or painful. But when an individual reconnects with their symbolic center with the self, they begin to live with purpose. Not purpose imposed from outside, but purpose that arises organically from within. This sense of inner direction becomes a compass, guiding choices, relationships, and expressions. It does not require perfection. It requires authenticity. It asks the person not to become someone else, but to become who they already are beneath the confusion and the craving. Individuation is not a cure in the medical sense, but a healing in the archetypal sense. It is the journey out of fragmentation and into wholeness, a return not to the past, but to the depths of the self. The path may be difficult, filled with moments of doubt, fear, and resistance, but it is also sacred, for it honors the full complexity of what it means to be human. In following it, the addict no longer seeks escape from the self, but union with it. Addiction is not merely a failure of will or a chemical imbalance. It is a cry from the depths of the soul, a symptom of something far more profound than what appears on the surface. It is the outward expression of an inner fragmentation, a signal that the psyche has been severed from its source of meaning. Beneath every compulsive act lies a sacred longing to belong, to feel, to know oneself, and to touch something greater than the limited boundaries of the ego. The addict does not seek the substance alone, they seek transformation, transcendence, and wholeness, though they reach for it in misguided and self-destructive ways. To truly overcome addiction, one must shift the focus from suppression to integration, from pathology to purpose. The journey requires an encounter with the shadow, the disowned and uncomfortable parts of the self, and a recognition that healing is not found by escaping pain, but by understanding what that pain is trying to teach. It demands a symbolic awareness of the inner life, where images, dreams, and rituals reveal the archetypal energies shaping our behavior. Most importantly, it calls us onto the path of individuation, a return to the self, where the divided parts of the psyche can finally begin to speak to one another in the language of meaning. Recovery, then, is not just sobriety. It is a spiritual realignment, a rebalancing of the inner world. It is the reclaiming of the soul's voice, long drowned in noise, and the acceptance of life's paradoxes and depths. To heal from addiction is to walk through the fire of self-knowledge and emerge, not untouched, but transformed, more whole, more human, and finally more awake.